The town of Falaise, Normandy, northwest France. The year 1386. The murderer had sneaked into the couple's home. The husband, Jonnet the Builder, was away helping to erect a nearby church while his wife was down at the nearest stream, washing some linen garments. Their child was fast asleep in his crib. Seeing her opportunity, the killer crept up to the infant and attacked him, mutilating his face and tearing off his arms. It was not long before the perpetrator was caught and given a speedy trial. Being found guilty of murder, she was sentenced to be mangled and maimed before being given the death penalty. Despite being a female, the prisoner was dressed in a new white shirt, waistcoat, a pair of drawers, and taken to the gallows. Local people brought the prisoner's friends and family down to watch the execution, in the hope that they would be deterred from pursuing a life of crime like their associate. This killer was also made to wear a human mask, as she was in fact a pig. A receipt exists for the 9th of January which chronicles payment to the executioner of the town of Falaise of 10 sous and 10 deniers for this special hanging. The receipt reads, quote, "For his efforts and salary for having dragged and then hanged at the place of justice, a sow of approximately 3 years of age who had eaten the face of the child of Jonnet the Builder, who was in his crib and was approximately 3 months old, in such a way that the said infant died from the injuries." The hangman was given additional money for a new glove, and declares that he is well satisfied with this sum and makes no further claim on the king our sire. It would seem that the executioner was not happy to be known as a common pig killer. He was a master of high works and wanted to be provided with new gloves so that he could carry out his duty whilst his hands still remained clean. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at convicting and sentencing animals to death during the Middle Ages. Welcome to Medieval Madness. This little piggy. Most of the medieval trials that held animals criminally responsible for their behaviour took place in Western Europe, in the area that now covers modern-day Italy, Germany, Switzerland and France. The trials were formally held in a courtroom, complete with a judge, lawyers and witnesses. Animals were often left to roam the streets and fields in medieval towns and villages, as were children, which meant that accidents were very common. Pigs could weigh anything up to several £100 and were capable of doing a great deal of damage by killing and even eating people. Medieval judges believed in equality between human and animal rights. Animals were given autonomy and freedoms in the Middle Ages, but that meant that their crimes could also be punished under the same laws and just as harshly as those for humans. Animals, though, were hardly ever imprisoned. It was either a banishment from their community or a death sentence. A specific ruling would be given to a human for a particular crime, and a matching punishment would be applied to a convicted animal. There were two distinct types of animal trial: the secular type that was applied to the crimes of pigs, cows, horses, and other domestic animals, usually for the offence of murder. The culprits were often put to death, although for crimes less serious than murder, the animal's life might be spared and punishment would mean exile from the community. And then there were the trials established by the church against pests such as locusts, weevils, mice or rats, or even birds and snakes in order to get them to stop destroying crops. They would be exiled from fields, vineyards and orchards by way of excommunication or even exorcism. Pigs were the most frequent of animals to get into serious trouble. Those that committed homicide were usually hanged or buried alive. Those animals convicted of bestiality, which would appear to be an oxymoron in itself, would be burned to death. Like the pig near Paris in 1266 that was publicly burned after being sentenced to death by the monks of St. Genevieve for eating a child. It would seem that no one was exempt from the homicidal tendencies of porkers. As Louis the Gross found out when his son, the Crown Prince Philippe, was riding through Paris. A boar that belonged to an abbot ran through the legs of the prince's horse, causing him to be unseated and killed. Shoo Fly. The church claimed that it had the power to exile any creature just by banning them from the area. If the vermin left, then it was because of the power of God and the church's mediation in the case. But if the vermin stayed, well, that was of course because of the sinfulness of the people. In either case, the church retained its reputation and authority. In Mainz, Germany, during the 14th century, the peasants there made a complaint about some Spanish flies, which were ordered to appear before the authorities at a specified time. However, the judge ruled that, quote, "In consideration of their small size and the fact that they had not yet reached their majority, they should be assigned a guardian to defend them." Nevertheless, the flies received a banishment anyway, although their defender was able to obtain a piece of land where they could retire to. How this relocation was achieved is anyone's guess. Piggin Prices. It would seem that there was good money to be earned, at least in France, when it came to the execution of animals. For the murder of a child at Romain in 1394, a pig was sentenced to be haled and hanged by the lieutenant of the bailiff. He passed on the job to the hangman. There were various currencies in medieval France, and the executioner, Monsieur Micton, was paid 50 tournois for his services. In another case of 1403, the bailiff presented a bill of expenses acquired in the confinement and execution of a pig, with charges for the cost of keeping her in jail, the carriage to take her to justice, cords to bind and hale her, and new gloves, along with the fee for the hangman who had to travel specifically from Paris. The final bill came in at almost 70 Parisian sols. Both animal and human prisoners were treated in exactly the same way. The keeper of the prison in the French town of Pont-de-l'Arche was given money by the sheriff for bread to feed his captives, who included one pig, kept there from June to July of 1408 when it was hanged for killing a child. But extra money was needed for, quote, "a rope found and furnished for the purpose of tying the said pig that it might not escape." Bestial Beasts. Infanticidal pigs seemed to be quite common during the Middle Ages, but there were other offences and other animals that were treated with the same seriousness. In 1394, a pig was hanged at Mortagne for having sacrilegiously eaten a consecrated wafer. Sacrilegious. And the crime of sodomy with an animal meant that both parties would be punished by the death penalty. In 1565 at Montpellier, a man and a mule were convicted of the crime of buggery and sentenced to be burned alive. But the mule proved to be so vicious that the executioner cut off its feet so that it couldn't kick him. In 1546, a man and a cow were hanged and then burned for the same crime. A man named Gayet was condemned to be hanged and strangled on a gibbet in punishment of sodomy at Chartres in 1606. His partner in crime, a bitch, yes, a female dog, was sentenced to being knocked on the head by the executioner of high justice. Then the dead bodies of both were to be burned and reduced to ashes. Monsieur Gayet, who had been absconded, was to have all of his property confiscated and to pay a fine of 150 livres. An effigy of his likeness was to be attached to the gibbet and hang there until he was recaptured. A bull belonging to a farmer in the village of Moisy escaped in 1314 and ran into the road where it attacked a man, injuring him so badly that he later died. The bull was imprisoned by the Count of Valois' officer, tried, convicted, and hanged. Whilst at Gisors in 1405, payment was made to the carpenter who had built the scaffold, where an ox was also given the rope for its shortcomings. And in 1499, a red bull was executed for, quote, killing with furiosity a lad of 14 or 15 named Lucas Dupont. Apparently he had been employed by the cattle farmer who owned a homicidal bull. Then in 1474, for the heinous and unnatural crime of, quote, laying an egg, a cockerel was burned at the stake in Basel, Germany. It was a superstition in the Middle Ages that the egg of a cock would be used as one of the ingredients of witch ointment. It is of course much more likely that it was actually a hen that laid a small egg, and it was mistaken for an egg laid by an unlucky rooster. Animals were not always doomed to a hasty death though when convicted of a capital crime. A donkey and a pig who were originally condemned to death had their sentences reduced on appeal. The economical implications of someone losing a valuable animal could have possibly had something to do with this decision. Animal trials. Because animals were seen as a vital part of the community, they shared the same benefits as humans with regard to village life, so they were expected to put aside their wild impulses and become hard-working and well-adjusted members of society. The conduct of the animal defendant during the trial could make all of the difference to the outcome. Bad behaviour in the courtroom was always going to be frowned upon and seen as a black mark against the animal's character. A snort, tail flick, or the passing of wind at just the wrong moment could make or break a case. This is probably still the case. Intention was another decider of guilt. When a pig was found responsible for the killing of a 5-year-old boy in 1457, she was hanged by the hind legs from a tree. Although her piglets were, quote, found stained with blood and included in the indictment as accomplices on account of their youth and the corrupting influence of their mother, they were simply remanded into the custody of their owner. The judge, in his wisdom, deciding that the piglets were too immature to be seen as culpable co-conspirators. Today we look on these trials with astonishment and regard the medievals as superstitious and ignorant. But they must have believed that animals were sentient beings capable of emotion and knowing the difference between right and wrong. A lot of time, care and training was put into their welfare. And as strange or just plain silly as we may think animal trials were, it's a surprise to find that they still continue in the modern world. In Tennessee in 1916, an elephant named Mary, who murdered her trainer, was hanged from a crane. And in Macedonia in 2008, a bear was convicted of honey stealing from a beekeeper, with park services being made to pay $3,500 in damages on behalf of the bear. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Do hope you've enjoyed it, and please do subscribe if you enjoy these videos as we are releasing them weekly. Cheers!